The city of today is a junction where people are always on the move. One crossroad creates a meeting place, and 1,000 crossroads bring travelers from all directions of the compass. The growth of this fine city is an outstanding example of what has happened in so many communities in this age of personal mobility. The freedom which the automobile has given us to move from place to place has helped to free our minds. Sleepy villages have become dynamic centers of industry and commerce, of education and culture. Basically, the automobile aids the traveler, and in so doing has brought about many far-reaching results. More than just a means of transportation, it is also a real tool of communication. Communication spreads knowledge, and knowledge is the builder of change. But change is not easily achieved. Often, it is a cycle of events fired by a single idea. One important idea of this century was the application of the internal combustion engine to the automobile. In Chicago, there's an exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry. It portrays the changes in the American crossroads as well as anything in the history books. Changes primarily due to the automobile. Let's drop in and look back over the years.
Yes, sir. I recollect when the 20th century checked in at Pleasant Corners. Looked mighty like the 19th century. Some folks, they said you couldn't naturally expect much new anymore. But it turns out some folks weren't any great shakes at prophesying. Even now, they don't seem to appreciate what's happened. Happened to thousands of Pleasant Corners all over this land of ours. I recollect, just like 'twas yesterday, that afternoon when a parcel of us boys, we was lazing on the front stoop of Adam Hill's store, nothing better to do, and we was passing a few remarks, maybe sizing up this new man, Teddy Roosevelt, or maybe just wishing Springfield wasn't such a fur piece away. And I recollect, too, how we was watching young Betsy McPherson, she was old Doc McPherson's young one, and Adam's boy, Pete, building themselves a mud dam out in the puddles. When down the pike, Springfield way, we see this contraption a-coming. A genuine horseless carriage. Well, Betsy and Pete, they begin jumping up and down, real excited like, and right off the boys, they start yelling, "Need a horse, mister," and the like of that. Well, sir, it couldn't have happened more comical. That buggy just sets down in its traces, right in front of Jim Barnes' blacksmith shop. Wouldn't budge an inch. Jim, he come a-running out, but he don't know beans about engines. Fella driving, he knows less. And the upshot is, danged if he don't have to get a horse. All of us felt right sorry for that fella, wasting his money on a fool device like that. Well, sir, it must have been along about 1908 that them horseless buggies, they began bounding by so often, maybe two in the same day, that Jim Barnes, he went and built himself a garage and started tinkering with engines regular. Never could make one go, though. Well, in 1914, the state surfaced the Springfield Pike. You'd be surprised after that how townsfolk started nosing out our way. Following year, they built the steel bridge and fixed up the Smithtown Road. Darned if some city fella didn't sell old John Marshall the idea of putting up some city-fied, bungalows on his land. All of us felt mighty sorry for old John. Leastways, we did until townsfolk started buying the darn things, and old John built his new barn and all. How was we to know that city folks had that crazy notion of working one place and sleeping t'other? That meat market next to Hill's store, Adam put that up for his son Pete. He figured Pete and Betsy maybe could someday make a nice living out of it. And I guess they would have, too, excepting for Pete's enlisting and going right off to France. Well, that was the year we got a post office. And then that telegram about Pete come from the War Department. As if that wasn't trouble enough for poor Betsy, old Doc McPherson, he caught the flu. Real bad, too. Wouldn't stay down no more than a cowlick. And finally, Betsy, she had to carry her dad off to the mountains. One lucky thing, though, was she managed to sell the old McPherson place to John Craig and his banker friends. Well, old Doc died the summer they built another room on the school. After a bit, Betsy came back to Pleasant Corners. But it wasn't the same Betsy. First thing we knew, she up and married a queer duck named Harris. We all felt sorry for her, especially when we got news about Pete only being a prisoner. But she went right ahead, trying to make a go of a marriage. Even put up a little lunchroom for Harris down the pike with what was left of her money. Seems like, though, he'd rather drive the county gravel truck when he could work at all. So she pitched in and run the lunchroom herself. She always was a plucky one. Good, sinewy stuff in Pleasant Corners, and it only needed that crazy, one-lunged buggy to bring it out. When you sized up 1920 against that sleepy crossroads of 1900, you realized that we'd come a long way. Maybe it didn't stack up much alongside of big towns with factories and such, but you can bet the activity of all the Pleasant Corners in the country, that meant a lot of orders placed in Chicago and St. Louis and New York. Of course, John Craig over at the First National, he said when the country got back to normalcy, you couldn't look for things changing near so fast. He said 1920 motor cars was just about as good as engineers could make. It's pretty, too. And that with so many already on the road, why, it was foolish to expect people to keep on buying a lot of new ones. You know, I just sort of wish old John Craig, he could have stayed around to see what happened. Though I expect he'd still be croaking the same tune. Well, sir, things really started popping just after he died, long about 25, that was. A rash of new houses in Marshall Heights, a new school, and the county's first 4-lane highway. Adam Hill, he sold out his emporium and meat market long in, 27, after he finally give up waiting for his boy Pete to come home and take over. Pete Hill, they say, he's done right smart for himself in the big town, starting in with wholesale supplies and working up to a string of his own restaurants. Hill's milestone houses, he calls them. In 1928, the state put in the concrete bridge across Mott Creek so as the buses could run to Springfield. That's the new bus station alongside of Jim Barnes' garage. Well, the Depression hit Pleasant Corners like any other place. Of course, we got a fancy new post office and a town hall. But Alice Hill, she lost old Adam's money, and she had to start that farmer's market. And Betsy McPherson, or rather Harris, she would have lost the lunch wagon if that no-account husband of hers hadn't run his car into the creek about that time. Of course, all of us were sorry, for her sake, but as a matter of fact, as soon as she didn't have all them IOUs raining down on her, why, Betsy, she begun putting some money away. And 'twasn't long before she bought a Hills Milestone House franchise and the Siesta Motel down the pike there. Those Milestone House restaurants, they're popular as a melon patch in August. So Betsy, she's hoeing a easier row now. And what's more, the big boss of the Milestone House chain, Pete Hill, that is, he dropped over between planes last week to inspect his newest place. Must be a long time between planes because he's still here, just sort of hanging round. You know, 'twouldn't surprise me one bit if Betsy and Pete Hill got married after all. Well, that about brings us up to date on Pleasant Corners. They went and rebuilt the theater, and we got our own police department now, standing over there by the traffic light, facing Jim Barnes' new service station and showroom. Of course, we still have our John Craigs, and I guess it's surprising that I ain't one of 'em at my age. But you know, I still figure tomorrow is bound to be a lot better than today. It may not be men and motors, or men and airplanes, or men and atoms, but it will be men and something. Our country still has its ability to create and work and build. It's just now gathering itself together for its next spring forward. And boy, I'd sure like to be here to see that jump.
In 1939, the tomorrow which is now today was portrayed by the original Futurama exhibit at the World's Fair. It's interesting to look back at the forecast made more than a quarter of a century ago and find that the dreamers of yesterday had painted a surprisingly accurate picture of our cities and highways as we know them today. Imagine the wonderful world of tomorrow if the creators of Futurama 2 at the 1964 World's Fair are as accurate in their forecast. They said we would have thriving villages and cities in the land of the Arctic and Antarctic, crossroads of progress in areas that were once steaming jungles, and towns and motels located far under the sea. Even as we're talking here, the moon has become a target of exploration. Can this be the pleasant corners of tomorrow? Anything is possible when we look beyond the contemporary and imagine things as we would like them to be. After all, our future begins with our imagination and our inventiveness. As dusk softens the silhouettes of towers in our great cities, we see the full-scale reality of what far-sighted dreamers envisioned in miniature models only a generation ago. The automobile has immeasurably helped shape the way we live today. Many other new ideas are bound to help advance the world of tomorrow. Whether they come from a single individual or teams of professionals, one thing for sure, man is continually striving to make the world a better place in which to live. And there is every reason to believe that our progress over the past few decades will be even more accelerated and exciting in the years to come.